I did spend the last several days sitting in my craft room at my table, trying to decide what to say to you all without keeping you here for several days. I will start to say that my hope is when I'm finished, you will have a better sense of who I am and how I've gotten here. I'm a born and raised Episcopalian, baptized, confirmed, and married both times in the Episcopal Church. I've been part of the church choir in every church I've attended. My faith and my church have always been a big part of my life, especially the Church of Our Savior, since I've been a member here for over 40 years. I led a charmed and privileged childhood as afforded by my parents, John and Sally Ketchum. I was the third of 4 children, and we lived in a wonderfully affluent neighborhood in Bethesda, Maryland. Everyone knew each other. We played together, we went to school together, and I'm happy to say that some of those childhood friends are still in my life after 69 years. Unfortunately for my family, everything blew up in February of 1974 when my oldest brother, John, died in a tragic car accident at the age of 24. It put us all in a tailspin. No one ever had to deal with anything like this, and no one knew how. Yes, people came over, they offered to help in any way, but no one would talk about him. No one would talk about what happened. They just didn't know what to say, and my parents dealt with it very differently. My mom wanted to talk about him. My dad wanted to look at pictures. My other brother, Jeff, who was 22, he escaped back to college in Pennsylvania. And I was left at 19, caring for my 9-year-old sister, Eleanor, and my parents. How was I at 19 able to handle this huge responsibility, you may ask? It was with a great deal of prayer and some divine intervention. The first intervention came after my mom read an article in the Washington Post about a new support group that was starting for parents who'd lost a child called the Compassionate Friends. And this new support group was the miracle that my mom needed in order to start living her life again. And by some miracle, she got my dad to go with her. It was a huge turning point for them and for the family. The second intervention was more for me, and I prefer to say it was a miracle, and it came in the form of one of our neighbors. This neighbor, Janet Felker, came to me after my brother died and asked me to come care for her 4 children, ages 9 months, 4, 11, and 13, while she would be undergoing chemo and radiation for cancer. Little did I know that that woman would be the person to change my life in such a profound way and put me on a journey that I'm still on today. Janet's battle lasted for about 5 years, and I spent a good deal of that time working in the Felker house, caring for those children. I watched Janet go through hell, not only dealing with cancer, but she was grieving too. She just lost both her parents in a tragic car accident. Janet showed me what courage, strength, compassion, hope, joy, and love while facing hell was all about. She taught me the power to understand how you can come through unbelievable tragedy and hardship to come out on the other side looking at positivity while creating a new and different life. Her resilience and strength came from her faith. Janet became my mentor and hero, along with my incredible mom. These 2 God-fearing, Episcopal church-going, strong women both had been through their own hell, and they continued to show me what waking up each morning, doing everything they could to find the positive, counting their blessings, and being grateful for every little thing they had. I can say that's how I've been able to get through my hell, doing the same. What I can tell you about Janet, she was a pioneer, and so was my mom. Janet had researched this new concept back in the late 70s called hospice. She made it clear that she wanted to die at home with peace, dignity, and pain-free, and with her family surrounding her. But back in the 70s, it just wasn't done. It wasn't heard of. So she did her research. She contacted Dame Cicely Saunders, who was the creator of hospice in England. And she contacted Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who was the author of The 5 Stages of Dying and Grief. And she put a plan together. She presented it to her doctors and said, "This is how I'm going to die, at home with my family, and you guys are going to make it happen." And they said, "I don't think so." And she said, "Oh, I think so." And that's exactly how she died. I was honored to be there with her and with her family. And it was one of the most amazing times to watch. But before she died, she gave my mom all the research that she put together and said, "You and Liz, create a hospice here in Montgomery County, Maryland, so others can die as I'm going to, their way." And on June 17th, 1979, Janet died her way at home, listening to the sounds of her two youngest daughters giggling and laughing outside her window while they were playing cards with my mom and me. It was one of the most beautiful experiences of my life watching this unfold. Janet's funeral was held at St. Albans Episcopal Church on the grounds of the National Cathedral. She had arranged to have the children's choir sing her favorite song, "Morning Has Broken." And I know she'd be very pleased to know that 3 years later it was put in the Episcopal hymnal. It was shortly after that my mom started working to create this hospice that Janet had requested. What you should know about my mom was she was 50 years old and had been a wife and a mom all her adult life. So this journey was just as life-changing for her as it was for me. She started pounding the pavement and put a board of directors together. We did fundraising. We did the work to make licensing happen. She even got our church, St. John's Episcopal Church in Bethesda, Maryland, to give us their basement for the first 10 years of the life of Montgomery Hospice. And now, Montgomery Hospice is still a thriving hospice today. It was actually the first hospice in Maryland and the third in the U.S. And it has currently served over 50,000 families in Montgomery County ever since, and has now its own hospice house. Ever since that time, hospice has been in my blood, and I have worked at different ones over the years. The last one was with Beacon Hospice in Nashua as their volunteer coordinator. I recruited, trained, and placed volunteers with the dying. It was working for them when I thought I knew everything there was about grief and how to deal with it, that my family was struck yet again. In May of 2008, my brother Jeff's wife of 30 years, Lisa, died after a 2-year battle with cancer. And during that time, since they lived in Bethesda, the very hospice my mom and I created was the hospice that took care of her. And we were all taking that pretty hard and as prepared as we could be. However, little did we know that Lisa's death would be the first of 3 that year. As we were preparing for my daughter and my only child, Joanna's wedding, to her wonderful fiance, on August 6, 2008, Joanna died suddenly from an apparent blood clot that was misdiagnosed at the hospital in Keene, where they were living. It was almost more than I could comprehend. How could this have happened? How could I now be planning a funeral instead of a wedding? Well, I'll tell you how. Peter and I were surrounded by the loving arms of our church family. Almost from the moment it happened, we never felt alone. The incredible members of this very congregation opened their hearts, their love poured out, and not once did we ever feel alone. My sister Eleanor came to be with us the night Joanna died from her home in Baltimore. She was there for 2 weeks, and she has told me many times how much this congregation helped her, and as well as Peter and me, and that in all her life she had never experienced such a caring, loving, and true body of Christianity as she did while she was being cared for by the members of this church. She left here knowing that we would be taken care of, and that brought her comfort too. On the night of Joanna's service, it was an incredible service. I had a wonderful talk with my mom. Mom and Dad were now in an assisted living in Virginia, and they weren't able to come up. However, I knew my mom was the one person I needed to talk to because she knew my journey. She made me promise her that night that I would find a Compassionate Friends chapter because she knew, of all people, that they would help me with my journey. Little did I know that that would be the last conversation I had with my mom, as the next morning she suffered a stroke and died 3 days later. I was reeling from all the trauma. I didn't really know which end was up. We continued to be cared for by our family, friends, and everyone here at the church. However, we were also blessed with a very special family that Joanna gave us. I'm talking about her fiance, Nathan, her dear friend, Haley, who has been Nathan's wife for the last 10 years, and her 2 best friends, Nicole and Brenda. And they have come and spent every holiday, Mother's Day, Father's Day, birthdays, anniversaries with us for the last almost 16 years. And we are so blessed to have them. And we know how rare this is. And they will be our families always. After Joanna and my mom died, I did indeed honor my mother's request, and I did find a Compassionate Friends chapter here in Manchester. They helped me deal with what I was going through in a way no one else could, because they knew my journey. They helped me more than you'll ever know, especially those first 2 years when everything was so raw. After those first 2 years, I just decided it was time for me to give back and be there for the newly bereaved parents, as others were there for me. I trained to become a facilitator for Compassionate Friends, and I continue to facilitate for the Manchester chapter today. Recently, because of Compassionate Friends, I was afforded the opportunity to take a new course by the renowned grief expert, David Kessler, to become a certified grief educator. My goal now as a grief educator is to take the program I'm creating about death and grief into high schools, colleges, and honestly, any place that wants me to speak, in the hopes of changing our grief-denying world into a grief-accepting one. It's the reason David Kessler started the Grief Educator program 3 years ago, so that he would have the help he needed to educate others and how important it is to talk about this. In those 3 years, he has trained several thousand globally. Everyone will someday have to experience a death of which there are many kinds. There is, of course, the death of a loved one, loss of a marriage, loss of a job, loss of your livelihood, your home, your health, and the loss of a pet too. Truly, grief comes with all of that. And how do I know this to be true? Because I have experienced every one of those losses. Now, wouldn't it be amazing if it was accepted, shared, and honored when we talked about these things? I have always and will continue to honor and remember Joanna, because that's what grieving is all about. Losing a child is nothing you ever get over. You learn to live a new and different life. I can honestly tell you that I have found joy, love, and happiness again. I do get up every morning and think how I miss Joanna and all my loved ones, but I can feel Joanna with me all the time. And I can see that she's smiling down at me saying, "You go, Mom. You go tell everybody that you've gotten through and still have a good life, still have a happy life, and yes, thank God for all that He's given me. He's given me more courage, compassion, a listening ear, and an open heart so that I can get through anything that is put in front of me because I am loved, I am cared for, and I have an entire church family that has shown me more times than I can count how much they love me." Thank you for having me share this with you this morning. I want to leave you with this thought. If you ever need someone to talk to or have someone listen, I am here ready to listen and can hold your heart as you all have held mine.